Perfect. Welcome everyone to the Gender Safe webinar on introductory training on gender-based violence in academia and the 7P framework. As you have noted, this webinar is recorded, therefore your microphones are now muted, but feel free to keep your cameras on. It will be great to see some faces. As the webinar will be recorded, your personal data or name or camera will not be, or video will not be included in the recording. So any interactive sessions will be later removed. Note that, okay, sorry. My screen has frozen for a bit. I hope you can hear me well. If not, please notify me.
We can hear you.
Perfect, perfect. Thanks a lot. Now that more people have joined, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Panayota Policarpou, and today I will be the trainer for this session. Before we start, allow me to share some ground rules for today's training. Towards the end of this training, we will have a dedicated session for questions and answers. And there we will address any questions you may have. So feel free to keep track of those in the chat box or in your notes, and we will address them at the end of the session. If we don't have enough time to address all the questions, of course, we will follow up with an email and answer any unaddressed questions. Make sure you can locate the chat on your screen is at the right bottom, depending on where you have the settings of your Zoom. Please keep your questions as concise as possible so everyone has some time to participate, and make sure you come back from the breaks in time. This is a safe space, and we would like you, if you wish to share any experience, we will of course follow confidentiality because it's very important for us, and we would like to ask you to also treat others' experiences with respect. Considering the sensitivity of the topic, it is possible that certain incidents may trigger some participants. Therefore, we need to have that in mind, as some of us might be victims, survivors of or bystanders of gender-based violence. If you feel uncomfortable at any point during the training, you may need to step aside. Feel free to do so. That is totally fine. If you want to inform me through a short private message, you can do so, but this is not mandatory. A very brief reminder of the objectives of this training today. I'm sure you're familiar with them, but I'll go through them very, very quickly. The aim is for you to gain understanding of the concepts related to gender-based violence and understand its impact in academia. We will demonstrate the existence of this phenomenon in this research field, but in the broader specificities of academia as well. We will focus a lot on the 7Ps model of UNICEF, which you might be familiar with already, includes prevalence, prevention, protection, prosecution, provision of services, partnerships, and policies. We will present this holistic approach addressing gender-based violence, but we will also share some inspiring practices for each of these Ps that have been adopted by other European and member states higher education institutions. Perhaps a very short introduction to Gender Safe. Gender Safe is the follow-up project of UNICEF, and it aims to build upon the results and tools developed by UNICEF. We will touch upon some today. We will present some in more detail. And Gender Safe aims to support research and higher education institutions in setting up comprehensive policies to effectively counteract gender-based violence. You can find more about Gender Safe on its official website. I'll share it with you, of course, as a follow-up on this training. So the program of today is as follows. We will start with some of you, anyone who wishes to share your expectations from today's training. And then we will dive into understanding what gender-based violence is. We will present some important facts and figures, as I mentioned before, from the UNICEF survey. And then we will run our first exercise on the categorization of the forms of gender-based violence. And we'll present the 7P conceptual framework alongside with the toolkit that was developed by UNICEF. We'll have a 10-minute break And then we'll focus on the rest of the day presenting more in detail each of the P's of the 7P framework. For each P, we'll present some tips and hints, some more practical advice and the inspiring practices. We will have our lunch break at 12:20 to 1:20 Central European Time, so for 1 hour, and we will conclude our session at 3 Central European Time. So having said that, I'd like to invite you, if you wish to share perhaps your expectations or what do you wish to gain from today's training. You can share those by unmuting yourself or sharing those in the chat box. If you want to share your name and pronouns or even your title, where you come from, it will be great. As a first part of our training, we would like to start with some reflections that you may have had based on the story that we sent you. So before I give some quick instructions on how we will work on this together, I'd like to provide a very, very brief overview of the story for those who may have not had time to read it before. So this case story highlights the systemic challenges and issues faced by university in handling allegations of gender-based violence, specifically through the story of a professor that you see his name written as FD. So despite many years of circulating rumors about FD's inappropriate behavior, it took 2 years until March 2018 for a formal complaint of rape to be made against him. And that was related to an incident that happened in July 2016. So that person was known for his predatory behavior towards women. He was known for favoritism. He was known for leveraging his network within the faculty to intimidate and isolate those who criticized him. So this toxic atmosphere was described in the case story, because of him, led many women, female colleagues to departure from the department. And the story that described the efforts to address his behavior, which were hindered by a lot of resistance and reluctance to change, because he was a prominent figure within the academic community. And for this exercise, based on this story, we would like to hear from you. What do you believe went wrong in this case? What gaps have you identified, having in mind perhaps the institution's responsibility? We will capture those thoughts through the Miro board. I will send this in the chat box. But we will now move into addressing the basics. And as someone mentioned before during the expectation sharing, it's important for us to have a clear definition of gender-based violence, its different forms, and its size across this field. Let me change my slide. It's coming up. Sorry, it's a bit slow today. Yes, perfect. So to start with, as I mentioned, the definition we will first see is that's coming from the Council of Europe, that defines gender-based violence that is referred to any type of harm that is perpetrated against a person or a group of people because of their factual or perceived gender, sexual orientation, and or gender identity. Gender-based violence can be sexual, can be physical, verbal, psychological, or socioeconomic, and it takes different forms. It can be from verbal violence to hate speech on the internet to rape or murder. Of course, it can be by anyone, a current or former spouse or partner, a family member, a colleague from work, schoolmates, friends, an unknown person, or people who act on behalf of a cultural, religious state or interstate institutions. Now, according to UNICEF and GenderSafe understanding of gender-based violence, the term here is used to capture all forms of gender-based violence and abuse that are based on gender, but it also goes beyond this narrow legislation definition that we saw. It captures physical violence, sexual violence, psychological violence, economic violence, sexual harassment on the ground of gender, and organizational violence, both offline or in online context. Gender-based violence, as we understand it, is conceptualized as a continuum, whereby imagine that seemingly innocent or mild forms of misconduct, if they're not addressed, then they tend to gradually escalate into a more severe and grave forms of violence. That's what we mean when we use the word of continuum. On such continuum, one can think of inappropriate questions. It might be for someone's life, it might be sexist language, it might be unintended bodily contact. And this can escalate into involving physical or sexual violence and even rape, as we mentioned before. So violence is in this understanding used as an encompassing term that captures all stages of continuum. So as you see from this image, it's very common to see this metaphor of violence in this iceberg, where the iceberg represents the visible and invisible aspects of violence, where beneath the surface, there are many forms of violence that are less visible, that can be as damaging as those on top. So these include perhaps psychological violence, threats, intimidation, emotional abuse, systemic violence in the form of discrimination or exclusion, the use of sexist language, and many more. And these forms, we see that they're usually overlooked or dismissed, but they can have a profound impact on individuals and society as a whole as the rest. Now, UNICEF has carried out what we believe the largest cross-cultural survey in Europe in the research sector on gender-based violence. We collected over 42,000 responses from staff and students across 46 research performing organizations in 15 different countries, and the survey was translated in 14 languages. We will now dive into some of the main results, outcomes of this survey, but we will also provide you the detailed report of the results. The results show that nearly 2 in 3 respondents have experienced at least one form of gender-based violence since they started working or studying at their institution. That was 62%, to be a bit more precise. So 62% of the 42,000 plus respondents have experienced at least one form of gender-based violence. From those, respondents who identify as LGBTQ+, those who reported a disability or a chronic illness, and those belonging to an ethnic minority group, these were more likely to have experienced at least one incident of gender-based violence compared to those who do not identify with those characteristics. So we will see later on these aspects of intersectionality and how it does affect the experience of individuals. Almost 1 in 3 students and staff say that they have experienced sexual harassment within their institution. That was 31%. But what's even more alarming that from these stats is that amongst those who reported that they had experienced gender-based violence, only 13% reported it, 13%. And among the reasons for not reporting events of gender-based violence, as you see from the graph, almost half of the victims, 46%, said that they felt uncertain whether the behavior was serious enough to report it. And another frequent reason for not reporting was that victims did not always recognize the behavior as violence at the time of the incident. That was 31%. So understanding the impact and the consequences was another important dimension of this survey. And the data show that for staff, such experiences have led to decrease in work satisfaction, decrease in work productivity, and increase of consideration to leave the academic sector. While for students, such experience had led them to miss classes, to reduce learning achievements, and they were less disengaged with their fellow students and felt dissatisfied with the course of their studies. Now, what's also very important for us to understand is the root and causes of factors of gender-based violence. And given everyone's profile, I'm sure you're very familiar with it. However, academia do have some unique characteristics that create the room for gender-based violence to grow. As we mentioned before, and as you're already familiar, gender-based violence is deeply rooted in the social and the cultural structures, the norms, and the values that govern our society, but particularly higher education. Gender-based violence is based on an imbalance of power, and it's carried out with the intention to either humiliate and make a person or a group of people feel inferior. Importantly, and this is the unique characteristics of academia, the power imbalances are considered a central root cause of violence. Of course, gender-based violence is commonly intersecting with other forms of grounds of oppression. For example, racialized violence, or different, and those different grounds of oppressions and inequality, people are exposed disproportionately to being subjected to violence. So it's therefore very important to consider, specifically for academia, which is marked by these hierarchical structures, that some people are placed distinctively in different levels of power and authority, whereby some of them may enjoy strong statutory protection, as we saw from the case, while others work under precarious contracts or they are just students. So this power imbalance is considered the main root of the main root cause of gender-based violence in academia, and it's important to have that in mind also while addressing the 7 Ps we will see later. As I mentioned before, the concept of intersectionality is one dimension that is taken into consideration not only on UNICEF survey, but also in the approach of addressing gender-based violence to the 7P framework. And we will go through it later as well. Just a very brief definition of intersectionality. Intersectionality is considered a concept that describes how our different identities, might be our gender, our race, our ethnicity, our class, our sexuality, our ability, intersect, but also interact with one another to shape our unique individual experiences. Intersectionality recognizes that these identities are not separate and independent, but are interconnected, and they affect each other in very complex ways. And to focus on gender-based violence, intersectionality acknowledges that gender-based violence can disproportionately impact individuals who hold multiple identities, as we briefly saw from the results of UNICEF survey. Having said that, we will now move to another very short exercise, which we will again use the Miro board, but you will now work in subgroups for 10 minutes. The goal of this exercise is to examine several incidents of gender-based violence that are taking place in academic context. And you will see that they're briefly stated in those short statements that you will see on the pink notes. This text aims to, it's not really about placing those different incidents in the right categories of gender-based violence, but it's rather to recognize how various forms of gender-based violence can manifest differently. So you will be now assigned in 5 groups, and you will first have to find your working board in the Miro, and you will see that there are 5 different big groups in Miro board, and the way you will find yours is by looking at the room number you are on Zoom. If you are in Zoom room number 1, you will go find the group number 1 on Miro-board. Then once you are there with your group, we will advise you if you could identify one person who will be responsible to move the sticky notes in the right category, and then you can start reading each note separately and discuss with your group, where do you believe this incident belongs? Which form of gender-based violence belongs? I will share in the chat box some definitions, the definitions of the different forms that perhaps will help you. And then we will go into the Zoom room. Feel free to copy those definitions now in your in a note, in a document you have, so you can for some reason I can't share the definitions. Give me some time, please. Sorry for this. Okay, I have an issue with my chat box. I will send those in different messages because it seems that my message is too long and cannot be sent. So I will share this separately. Feel free to copy those so you can have a look during the exercise. And I will send again the Miro link, and Vasya will then help you find your room. Perfect. Of the definitions, I'm sending again the Miro boards in case you don't have it open from before, and feel free to join your rooms. Thank you, Vasya.
Εντάξει.
Ναι, νομίζω. Είναι λίγο ερχομένη. Share again my screen. Give me a few seconds until my screen comes up. Excellent. Thanks a lot for your patience again. Sorry, it's still coming up for me. That's why I'm waiting. Okay, perfect. That's it now. Right. So as we mentioned at the beginning, we will focus and dive into the 7P framework. So you also have a better understanding of what it is, what does it include, and we will focus on each P separately. So UNICEF and GenderSafe uses this holistic framework for the analysis, for the assessment, and the development of comprehensive policies that aim to end gender-based violence. It's called the 7P framework, the 7P model, with the 7 different Ps that you now see also in the diagram. And this model extends the conventional UN's and EU's 3P approach, which is the prevention, protection, prosecution, but also the Council of Europe Istanbul Convention 4 Ps, which includes prevention, protection, prosecution, and policies. I will present the definitions of the 7 Ps now very briefly, but I will repeat those later with more details. So to start with prevalence, prevalence refers to data collection that estimates the extent of gender-based violence for different groups of people. And ideally, it provides information on different forms of gender-based violence as well. Prevention refers to measures to promote changes in the social and cultural patterns of behavior and attitudes of the members of an institutional community. It addresses the culture and values of the organization and what it stands for.
what it stands for, and we will see some examples on what different forms prevention can take place.
Protection aims to ensure the safety and that the needs of potential victims are being met. This includes clear procedures, infrastructure, reporting mechanism, as we mentioned before during the case story, and any support needed for the people who are reporting an incident. And this might be victims, survivors, bystanders, whistleblowers, intermediaries, etc. Prosecution and disciplinary measures cover legal proceedings against suspected perpetrators and any related investigative measures and judicial procedures and proceedings, including court cases, including criminal and civil offenses, but also internal disciplinary grievance procedures. Provision of services refers to the services that are offered to support victims and their families, offenders, bystanders of gender-based violence, but also other members of the institutional community who might be affected by incidents. Partnerships now relate mostly to the involvement of relevant factors at all levels. It might be governmental agencies, civil society organizations, service providers, trade unions, or staff and student associations. External partnerships complement the available skills and competence and perhaps expertise that is available within an institution. And we will see how partnerships will come to support this. And last but not least, policies, which refer to the policy frameworks, which are the existence of a coherent set of measures with a clear vision and comprehensive strategy that responds to gender-based violence in a more structured and integral way. We do see some good practices on how such framework can be designed, and we will focus particularly for organizations who are at the beginning stages of such frameworks. Now, I would like to briefly present to you the UNICEF Toolkit, which has been developed to support higher education institutions and research organizations in addressing gender-based violence. The UNICEF Toolkit is based on materials that have been collected and analyzed with the specific aim to develop these guidance and tools for supporting institutional policy development, but also practice along with the 7P model. I will now stop sharing this screen so I can bring out the toolkit that we will go through it through the main sections of the toolkit. Perfect. Sharing again. Okay. Of course, we will send the URL, the link of the toolkit later after the end of this training. So on the homepage of the UNICEF Toolkit, you will find the 9 main tiles with the main sections of the toolkit. If you scroll further down, you will find a dedicated page and a video that will help you guide through the toolkit. You will see that the convenient shortcuts page that is presented here has some questions that can help you rather identify the right page, the right document, the right video that you may need to watch, depending where you stand, what your needs are. So you will see that we have a very long list of questions that provide you these shortcuts to navigate around the page. And going back to the homepage, if you scroll a bit further down, you will find the emergency contacts and support services list that was designed by UNICEF. It has counseling and helplines listed by country. So feel free to navigate in this page as well. But now I would like to focus more on the 9 tiles that we mentioned at the beginning, which are the, let's say, main elements of the UNICEF Toolkit. The first tile refers to gender-based violence, another concept, which is the glossary of this toolkit.
Here you will find, of course, the definition of gender-based violence and some other important terms that are used across the toolkit. It's coming up now on my page. You will see the definition, then we focus on the different forms of gender-based violence that you also read briefly before. But then we do have a list in alphabetical order of different terms that you will find across the toolkit and its supporting documents as well. Moving on, the second tile refers to facts and figures. And here you will find the results of UNICEF survey. You'll find some additional stats and important information that perhaps were not presented today, but if down, you will find the survey results, the document reporting in more detail, the results of UNICEF survey, and other relevant documents that are supportive of these results. The third tile refers to the legal and policy framework in Europe, which is accompanied by an interactive map. I will also refer to that later. This map includes laws and policies addressing gender-based violence, that includes also national reports, as well as an inventory of institutional policies for inspiration. You can click on this map and you will be directed in the page. And then you will find the 7P theoretical framework. Here, you will find more information about the theory behind the 7P framework with, sorry, it's coming up. I have a black screen. I'm not sure whether you can see too, but now it's coming up, I think. Yeah, perfect. You also have access to the academic article that explains in more detail the 7P theoretical framework. And at the bottom of this, we have a video that explains the theory, but also it gives brief definitions that I presented before to you of the 7Ps. This 7P theory site, you can also access it from the main bar you see on top now is under 7P theory, while under 7P practice, you will find the practical part of this toolkit that presents the 7Ps in detail. For example, if I click now on prevention, I will find a dedicated page on prevention where you will see this box on the right for easy navigation. This is a standardized approach followed by all the 7P dedicated pages where you can find a definition of each P, how to approach it, some tips and hints, do's and don'ts for each P. And we always have a dedicated section on intersectionality for each P. So how does intersectionality is being considered when it comes to implementing practices from prevention? I will go through it very quickly now. For example, it's about considering different ways in which intersectionality our intersectional identities impact how we recognize and define and respond to incidents of gender-based violence, the experience of marginalized communities, and so on. So for each P, you will see how intersectionality can play a role. And of course, for each page, you receive a set of inspiring practices from other research, educational institutions and organizations, and a list of resources for further reading for each P. So this structure is followed across all the pages. And one section of this toolkit is the resources and capacity building material. I believe someone at the beginning of our sharing mentioned the need to also find materials and capacity buildings that they can also use internally at their institutions. So here is a page that presents all the materials that have been either developed by UNICEF and soon also external resources that can be used. So yes, this page has a very rich set of materials that you can use. You can see that we start by first providing this toolkit in a PDF format that you can download. And then we have specific documents that were designed by UNICEF that focus on either guidance to create awareness raising campaigns on how to, or how to design a protocol, We have a crisis communication checklist and many other documents that you can use either for co-creation workshops as an ice breaking activities during a training or webinar, such as the case stories that we used at the beginning, or even persona stories, and a set of recommendation addressed to 6 distinct groups of stakeholders, which we highly recommend to use for your advocacy and lobbying efforts. And then under the UNICEF capacity building materials, you will see either some pre-recorded webinars like ours that present the 7P framework that ran last year, or a webinar on how to use the awareness raising guides that we developed, in addition to some inspiring practices that are presented during the webinar. We also have a recent webinar on formal complaints. Sorry, on proactive strategy without formal complaints. That was with an external guest speaker. And then we have a set of training materials that address to different topics and different target groups. For example, you will see one that focuses on active bystander intervention, and you find it both in online and off and in-person context. You will see the different target groups for each of them. Training materials that we have available, and once you download the training materials, you will receive the script, a presentation, supporting material for trainers, and some other guidance to create a safe space and more. And some of those trainings, we also have them available in different languages. So moving further, sorry, I'm not sure whether you saw my screen a bit more slow. Sorry for that, but navigate within the page yourself. And after these two sets, these two sections, you will also find some external resources of either academic or articles or books that we recommend, but also capacity building materials from external resources. Having said that, there's also one additional page that I may have missed before, which is the inspiring practices. So all the inspiring practices that are under each P are now gathered in a separate page named Inspiring Practices, where you can find the different examples that we have categorizing the different Ps. So you can navigate through these much faster than going into each page separately. So similarly to the structure before, you have this navigation box on your right, and then you can jump easily to the P you're interested for.
So I think some people are already coming up, so I will continue. And now we will move to the more practical part of our training today. And we will start with prevalence. As I mentioned before, I will be very briefly restating the definition of each of the Ps, and then we will dive into some more practical advice, tips, and hints, and we will look into the inspiring practices as well. So to start with prevalence, prevalence refers to the total number of individuals who have experienced gender-based violence at a particular point in time or within a specific period. And we'll see some examples on what we mean by that. And prevalence usually is expressed as a proportion of the population. So it includes all existing cases, either new or previously existing, during the period of measurement. For example, if a survey in a university finds that 30% of respondents have experienced some form of gender-based violence during their time of the institution, these figures represent the prevalence of gender-based violence in that university. For them, that time might not be particularly specialized in the survey. It might not say, I don't know, January 2016, but it mentions that it's during their time at the institution. Incidents, which is something different, but I'm referring to this because I find it important to be clarifying. incidence rate refers to the number of new cases of gender-based violence period in a population. Prevalence, therefore, is focused on collecting data through specific surveys, like the one we saw used by UNICEF, or universities can add questions to existing institutional surveys that run on a regular basis, in addition to other questions that they may exist. But they can also collect data from administrative data services. Such questionnaires, though, could include questions on the experiences of different forms of gender-based violence. It might include experiences of survivors or victims, bystanders, or even perpetrators, but also consequences, information about the consequences of gender-based violence related to their personal well-being, as we saw before, for the experience of students and staff, their work, their studies, and so on. So questions can also cover their perception and awareness of the institutional policies, whether they know if the university has policies or services offered, and they can also perhaps state their knowledge on prevention measures against gender-based violence. But we will see how this is connected with prevention as well. Now, some practical tips regarding the design stage of a survey. In case you're designing a survey of gender-based violence, you should always consider using existing and validated survey instruments. There's no need for you to reinvent the wheel, and we will see better. You already saw that the UNICEF survey is available on the toolkit, that you can use it as a good example. So such guidance offer open source examples that can help you build your own internal survey. And here we also advise, you will also see that from the UNICEF survey, to keep the length of the survey manageable in order to encourage, of course, the completion and to get higher response rate. It's important to collect data that you only intend to analyze, so be critical when you're using open-ended questions. And remember to use clear definitions for terms that you're using. For example, when you say, when you use phrases like off the campus, make sure you provide clear definition of what you mean off the campus, which is the limit, which buildings are considered off and on. But it's also important when you describe different forms of gender-based violence to describe concrete situations. So instead of using a specific term, such as sexual harassment, you can describe the incidents, because as we saw before, many people do not recognize sexual harassment as it is experience. They don't recognize it or connected with a particular term. And of course, we encourage to use gender inclusive language. We do not assume that all the victims identify as women. So choosing the word person instead is considered a good practice. Moving to some tips and hints regarding the survey implementation stage. So once you run the survey, when you search the survey, of course, for data protection, we advise to use internal channels to control access. In case, of course, it is an anonymous survey, so we need to ensure that the respondents actually belong to your institution. So we avoid sharing survey links via social media platforms, as you really don't know who will fill the survey. And of course, no login is required for such survey. Now, in order to ensure high response rate, we advise to send reminders, weekly reminders, to keep the survey access open for at least 4 weeks or even longer, because we know from data that victim survivors may decide to respond at a later stage. So not necessarily once the survey is launched or disseminated, to have that in mind when giving access for a short period of time to the survey. Now, the dissemination of the results to the decision-making body is highly and very important. When you share such results with such groups, they can better understand the scale, the scope, but also the severity of gender-based violence. So we highly recommend to use this information to build your case, to develop interventions and policies. So if you also don't have such data yet, you can use, for example, the UNICEF survey results that showcase the impact of gender-based violence in academia in general in Europe. Let me mention here, I also briefly mentioned that before, that in each dedicated page, in particular for prevalence, we have some additional elements on the UNICEF toolkit. I will have a dedicated page on the toolkit that refers to the research ethics. For example, we have we mentioned that it's very important to ensure anonymous participation, and that we do not collect any information on any personal information parameters that may help to identify the victim, perpetrator, and so on. Such surveys, of course, should take a survival or victim-centered approach and protect the respondents by re-traumatization. So make sure you either include trigger warnings in the informed consent form at the beginning, or provide information on available national, regional, or organizational helplines through the survey. And you can also, again, use the UNICEF collection that I referred to before of the National Support Resources and Counseling helplines. As a good practice here, we mentioned the UNICEF survey that is open source, and you can see in a very detailed approach how it is structured, how conditional questions rise up depending on how the respondents feel, and so on. We will forward that as well in the email that follows up. After prevalence, we will now see prevention. Prevention refers to measures that promote changes in the social and the cultural patterns of behavior and attitudes of the members of a community. Some examples are a clear code of conduct. A clear code of conduct lays out what behaviors are expected, what are the unwanted behavior, and this is usually accompanied by a protocol, which a protocol details the procedures in case of the violation of the code of conduct. So it's very important to distinguish those two, but it's also very important to identify how significant it is to have a protocol that clearly sets out what happens in case of the violation of a code of conduct. Prevention measures are also considered communication materials that exist, that are provided to either new staff or students about gender-based violence, about its different forms, about what the institution has in place, about the code of conduct and the protocol. So any communication material that supports the members of the community to understand what mechanisms are in place are also, of course, considered part of the prevention measures. Ongoing awareness campaigns about unwanted behaviors, the notion of consent. We will see some examples through the guidance for awareness raising developed by UNICEF. Of course, training programs and capacity building materials, training on empowerment of bystanders, or also the integration of issues related to gender-based violence in teaching and research. Of course, these are also considered measures of prevention. To be more specific now, with some tips and hints under prevention, to ensure, of course, that the communication of all what we mentioned before is very well established, is very important to engage with the communication departments of your institution. So it's very important to see a co-creation approach when it comes to organizing such campaigns or communication efforts as part of a prevention strategy. Such strategy can include the institutional communication strategy that support the institutionalization of your prevention measures. So it's important to make sure we engage the team members, colleagues from department, communication and marketing departments, and so forth, in the design, but also in the implementation process. We make sure that when we reach out to our target audience, we do that through different channels. So make sure you utilize the website, the social media pages. So multiple channels are highly encouraged. And we mentioned that also in the case before, the perpetrators accountability is highly important. So in order to hold perpetrators accountable, we need to ensure that faculty, staff, students, administrative services are aware of those policies. They are aware and they know well the code of conduct, their procedures, perhaps possible sanctions, as we mentioned before. So when providing such information, we always need to have this victim-centered approach. And we mentioned that before, but including information about what supporting services there are in place, what reporting procedures are in place, should always accompany such material, because of course, make it easier and more accessible for the user. But we know that such campaign efforts may also trigger victims or survivors or bystanders to come forward. So it's important to always connect it with what reporting mechanism or procedures are in place, or even supporting lines. And it's highly important because we've seen that happening. It's very important to include such information in an accessible page on a website. So do not avoid hiding that in subcategories or in hidden specific pages under departments or services. So ensure that such information is easily accessible for the users. We highly advise to create specific materials for newcomers, either staff or students. So make sure you have actions designated to such a target group. And a good practice here that is about building allies is to identify individuals who are committed to preventing gender-based violence and who are willing to be part of a prevention working group. So these can be responsible either for the design and implementation of such practices, but we highly recommend that such task or workforce is acknowledged and it doesn't go unnoticed. You can consider some mandatory sessions on gender-based violence during the onboarding training for staff and students, or even some mandatory training for staff that is promoting to top management. So this is a controversial discussion on whether some trainings of such nature should be mandatory or not. However, we highly recommend that, particularly for individuals that are into leadership positions, this is something that has to be considered. Another good example is to offer training to students and make it a precondition to participate in other mandatory courses. So you can provide a certification for this training that can serve as a prerequisite for enrollment in subsequent courses. And in order to make this training engaging and interactive, you can incorporate, for example, some elements of gaming or any other approach that can be more interactive for the particular audience. You can also consider attending, giving ECTS credits to students who are attending such trainings. So it's another approach that will perhaps encourage and motivate and incentivize their participation. Of course, it goes, I think, without saying, however, this is a very challenging one. Allocating sufficient budget for awareness raising campaigns and training programs efforts is highly important. And to regularly assess and update all the components of the prevention program to ensure that it remains relevant and effective is, of course, one of the final tips for prevention. An inspiring practice that we have here is coming from the University of Cambridge, which you will see from their website. They offer a set of training materials, access to the services offered at the university, tools for students and staff addressing harassment and sexual misconduct. So this is considered very good practice, again, available on the UNICEF Toolkit. And another similar example, or rather a bit more creative, is coming from the University of Geneva, which has designed a guide on sexual harassment, and it provides material for awareness raising campaigns, like you see those posters that describe the different forms therefore clarifies what sexual harassment is to students, and this is addresses what we said before. Many people do not recognize the different form when it happens, so such campaigns can address this. But it also provides information about supporting services offered by the university, and it has a table where it shows if you're a student and you're in this campus, you can reach to this and this and this. So it's a very good practice that brings together all the designated services available, different for staff and student. We highly recommend to review these practices. In addition to this, UNICEF has designed a guide, which is a practical tool to help you design awareness raising campaigns on gender-based violence. And it also provides some inspiring practices that can be replicated at your institution. So you will see we have an open source tool on Canva where you can use it to download, to design your own poster, like the one you see on the screen, which is inspired by another good practice. So having said that, these are the three examples addressing prevention, but on the UNICEF Toolkit dedicated page on prevention, there are many more, and we highly recommend you to review them as well. One note for inspiring practices, which I think is very important to highlight. Inspiring practices are not always appropriate to duplicate, because you have to always adapt them in your culture context. So it's a form of inspiration for you. For example, the guide that we just saw from the University of Geneva, it might be a good practice to get inspired and create something similar. We don't always recommend to duplicate something, but to rather get inspired by to adjust it in your own context. Now, moving on to protection. Protection, by the way, something I mentioned before, but I want to repeat it. If you have questions that are coming up while I'm talking, feel free to send those in the chat or note them down on your notebook. We will have a dedicated section on Q&A later, so we will go through that through your questions later. Okay, moving on to protection. Protection measures aim to ensure the safety, but also to ensure that the needs of victims or potential victims are being met. This includes having in place clear procedures and infrastructure within each institution for reporting, but also supporting people who report gender-based violence. And this includes other bystanders, whistleblowers, intermediaries, and so on. So we should not always think of victims, but the wider network as well. Protective measures should be designed to avoid potential victims or already existing victims and survivors suffer any further harm, including harm in the form of retaliation. Right, it's not only about the existence of forms of gender-based violence, but also retaliation or social exclusion or any other form that may arise. And protection measures, of course, should be activated for all types of harmful behaviors as soon as the institution is aware of potentially harmful situation or already existing harmful situation, and even if there is no formal complaint made, or in case of anonymous report. We will touch upon this soon. So advocate protection should be considered and offered with any incident that occurs during activities or on premises that link the university with the victim survivors. And this includes the organization's campus premises, might be library, classrooms, parks, sport facilities, but also in online environments. Online working groups, meetings, our social networks, platforms, learning platforms, depending what the university or research organization is using, even through emails, or during student events, during student leisure trips organized by student associations, but also away from campus. It might be during conferences, for example, while abroad, attending an international European conference, or even in field research activities where PhD or researcher students or mobile researchers attend. To this end, a victim-centered approach should be taken into consideration to all protective measures, and ideally and whenever possible, the protective measures taken involve the relocation of the alleged perpetrator rather than the victim and survivor. And it's highly important to underline that protection measures are determined on a case-by-case scenarios, taking into consideration, of course, the unique requirements of each situation. And of course, we need to have in mind that we provide a range of protection solutions. It is considered good practice to ask the person in question what they need and what do they expect from the institution. And any action taken to protect the person should be based on their needs. A few examples, let's say, of precautionary measures to protect students are to offer the option to transfer to another class, to attend an online class, or change supervisor, and so on. So these are some precautionary measures that can be taken in place. And of course, we highly recommend that we have effective reporting provisions in place so that the institution can offer protection when needed. Reporting should be possible through different options, as you see, in person and online, anonymous or not, formal or informal, in different languages, accessible 24/7. And they should also have the possibility to report to the institution of origin in case we have mobile researchers who are abroad for a semester, let's say. So protection, of course, can be decided upon and provided by a specific contact. It might be a person, a designated person in each faculty, for example, or a service, or a dedicated service if we have a diversity, equality, and inclusion office, and so on. Might be human resources staff, or emergency people or security officers, for example, providing immediate protection as first responders. For example, it might be offering a safe space during a student event, or to create another dormitory for the victim to be out of reach of their perpetrator, and so on. Now, in order to build a safe procedures, institutions should actively and clearly publicize whatever we mentioned right now to ensure that these are known to the whole community, as we mentioned before in prevention. At this point, though, I'd like to briefly expand a bit further to something that we consider very important, the distinction of formal and informal methodologies in anonymous reports, because I think it's important to clarify that before we move further. And I will also recommend to watch the dedicated webinar that I mentioned before on our available on our toolkit that refers to proactive strategies when there are no formal complaints in place. So formal reporting, just to clarify the definition first, refers to the structured process of lodging an official complaint with a designated service or authorities. Any member of the university community, of course, can file a complaint, can file a formal official report with a designated service. This can be done either in person or, if available, through an online reporting system. Once we admit that formal complaint and it has been confirmed, it results in the initiation of a formal investigation and disciplinary process based on the institutional policy. So based on what we mentioned before, it's described usually in a protocol. Then the initiation of a formal investigation and disciplinary process starts. There might be a different procedure for formal reporting for students and staff that depends on each institution. And a formal complaint can also be filed with the law enforcement authorities. This can be offered as an option to a victim, a survivor, or a bystander, but it must not be imposed as a way, let's say, to discourage formal reporting to the institutional services. If the law requires the reporting of potential crimes by the people who become aware of such a situation, for example, if I'm a professor and I become aware of such a situation, if the law enforces me to report it, then the person reporting this incident to me, the victim or survivor or bystander, should be informed. Now, informal reports offer persons the opportunity to share their experience in a less structured way, outside a strictly prescribed protocol, and without triggering investigation. Informal reporting can involve speaking to a trusted advisor, counselor, or someone in a supportive role within an institution, without necessarily disclosing the details to higher authorities, let's say. It offers a safe space for people to seek guidance. Perhaps they would like to explore what are the options. They would like to access support services without immediate pressure of formal action. So it's very important to consider informal reports in place exactly for these reasons. Of course, making an informal report should not and does not prevent the person from making a formal complaint later. That's very important to highlight. And an informal reporting system recognizes that not all situations require formal actions or disciplinary measures. Some cases, however, of course, cannot be solved informally because of the severity of the misconduct or because of the difference in the hierarchical positions between the complainant or the accused. So we need to make sure that we communicate that to the party, what's possible to happen given the informal complaint, depending on its severity. Now, very importantly, the institution should ensure the option of both formal and informal complaints to be filled confidentially. Confidential reports makes it possible to protect people's identity, where only the services handling the case know the complainant's identity. This, of course, limits what investigative and other steps the institution can take, but a formal confidential complaint can still serve as evidence in a future case. It is also important that the complainant is aware of what can and cannot be done with confidential reports. We need to provide clear guidance so both those who report, but also the professionals who receive the reports. Again, let's say I'm a designated person in a service. I need to know how to act in compliance with the procedures, ensuring confidentiality for the individuals reporting as they desire. Offering an anonymous reporting channel where the identity of the complainant is not known to anyone but the complainant, it helps to lower barriers to reporting, which are among other, of course, the fear of retaliation that we mentioned before. This encourages, of course, victims, bystanders to come forward, effectively addressing the issue of underreporting, but it's also essential to clarify what anonymous report, it's important to clarify that anonymous report and consider an informal reporting mechanism. It should be made clear that, of course, a follow-up on individual anonymous report is not possible, but the information gathered are still valuable for the institution to gain a better understanding of the prevalence, different types of gender-based violence that may occur, and which groups are most affected. So by analyzing patterns that emerge from data, the institution can become aware of potential issues and take steps to address them. This is also part of the risk assessment that is addressed under protection. Now, having said that, I will move to some tips and hints to be again more specific for protection and see some examples. Under the protection page, I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I want to make sure that it's clear that more details for what I'm saying already exist on the UNICEF toolkit, but also on the protocol guide on how to design a protocol. Now, moving on. Sorry, yes. Some tips and hints for protection. In order to give victims a sense of safety and protection, it's very important to act quickly, to allow for a quick response. So we need to act before escalation of any inadequate behaviors and avoid procedures that require their manager or supervisor to be contacted first, as this can, of course, make it difficult for a victim to report and seek support. We highly recommend to avoid warnings in spaces for reporting incidents, saying that false allegations are punishable under criminal law, as the effect of such, of course, actions may be dissuasive and make the victims fearful of reporting. So we need to ensure that reporting, we need to encourage reporting by providing complete information on possible sanctions against the perpetrators. So we give it clear signals of the importance and the value of reporting all incidents. For online violence, as we mentioned before, some examples might be during online teaching classes, learning platforms. It's highly recommended to have systems in place to flag incidents and get support. And it is considered a good practice, of course, to foresee emergency funding. So we can fund traveling expenses in incidents that occur during field trips, conferences, semesters abroad, and so on. Now, one inspiring practice that we have here is CHAT, which is an online risk assessment and monitoring screening tool from the University in Belgium, KU Leuven, where through this portal, the organization can share a concise questionnaire with employees where they complete it anonymously, and this report can give you insights and help the organization to map the social climate as described on the website, to assess risk. Chat sets, let's say, the basis for a dialogue, a chat, on cross-border behavior as a step towards an action plan. You can find more on their website. It's not in English, but you can easily use the Google Translator to get access to the insights of the structure of such a tool. And another good practice here is the Speak Out, which is an online anonymous report tool to disclose incidents of bullying, cyberbullying, harassment, discrimination, hate crime, and more. And this tool is designed by the University of Dublin. It helps to find relevant support, but also highlight the formal reporting options, both within the university, but also with external agencies. If I'm not mistaken, this tool has also, their anonymous reporting tool is open access, so you can also review how the questions are stated. And again, in the protection page, there are many more examples addressing this. Now, because we have plenty of time, after that, I had in mind to have the lunch break, but I will move on prosecution, and we will move to our lunch break later. So I'm skipping this. Now, prosecution measures refer specifically to the handling of the cases of gender-based violence. It includes investigative actions, disciplinary procedures, sanctions for perpetrators, and in some cases, it may also involve judicial proceedings, including court cases for criminal and civil offenses. There are some elements that needs to be considered when it comes to prosecution, and this is, of course, the importance to have clear and accessible, but also transparent procedures for handling incidents and complaints. And that requires, of course, a reasonable timeline between a complaint, its investigation, and the decision and sanction. We highly recommend mainstreaming victim-centered and trauma-informed, but also gender-responsive approaches when it comes to the prosecution measures, and hence provides specific trainings, of course, to the people involved in the procedures. As someone mentioned at the beginning, it's highly important to have competent and well-trained individuals when it comes to handling of such cases. This is, of course, not the easiest task to do. However, it is, of course, highly recommended. We need to ensure effective communication with victims, survivors, perpetrators, bystanders through each step of the process. But we also need to consider establishing distinct disciplinary procedures for staff and students, if of course that's possible. An important element also refers to defining criteria of investigation and disciplinary committees, as we mentioned before, and of course imposing proportionate, appropriate, but also fair and equitable sanctions depending on the case, as the result of each investigation and disciplinary process should be taken in mind. Now, some good practice standards to prosecution procedures is to ensure that internal procedures address gender-based violence separately from any other general disciplinary loosening procedures. Gender-based violence should not be treated in the same way, for example, as plagiarism. Informal and formal disciplinary procedures are clearly set out, including information on the types of disciplinary actions or sanctions. It might be, for example, verbal or written warning. It might be suspension. It might be dismissal. It might be that the perpetrator goes through a treatment or counseling, or they are going under an ongoing supervision. So clear information is provided, of course, on what can serve as evidence considering the different forms of gender-based violence. And we recommend to ensure a low threshold to start a formal investigation. Of course, the organization should not advocate joint meetings with the parties to clarify the situation or external mediation or conciliation procedures. This is not recommended. And now, related to investigation measures, some important standards are related to investigation which is initiated upon a formal complaint on when there are consistent indications of serious suspicion. So consider informal or anonymous reports to evaluate circumstances, context, and conduct of the alleged perpetrator to determine the need for further investigation or protective or preventive actions. And investigations and procedures are pursued even if the victims, survivors, or the alleged perpetrator have left the organization. This is highly recommended because we see it again as a common practice that investigations stop once the victim or the perpetrator leave the organization. Now, good practice standards related to internal disciplinary procedures and sanctions. So the main idea, of course, behind disciplinary actions is to correct behavior, which does not necessarily, of course, involve sanctions. However, the ability to impose sanctions on perpetrators, regardless of their status, is very essential. And internal disciplinary measures should be independent of the victim survivor decision to report the incident to the police or judicial authorities. As we said before, if the law obliges the reporting of crimes by professionals who become aware of such a situation, the victim or survivor should be informed, must be informed about it. Additional, of course, points related to these good practice standards are included under prosecution. And I mentioned that before, but the protocol guidelines developed by UNICEF creates specific items that need to be considered when it comes to investigation, disciplinary procedures, and sanctions. So you will see what are considered good standards when such protocol is designed. Now, some tips and hints. We need to ensure that we explore the establishment of a specific external body for investigating incidents. It can be potentially shared with other similar institutions in our region or country. We can consider modifying and adapting the duties of the accused person if it's a staff, for example, or their access to some certain parts of the campus if it's a student. Might be by offering online courses for the duration of the investigation, and to ensure that the psychologist is involved in the interpretation of facts reported by the reporting parties and the perpetrator. Now, regarding internal disciplinary procedures and sanctions, some tips and hints focus on the implementation of monitoring mechanisms for investigations and sanctions to demonstrate a consistent approach in holding perpetrators accountable, ensuring that high-value individuals, as we saw in that case in the morning, during the morning, high value scholars or individuals are not protected or are given any special treatment. To help avoid that a perpetrator reoffends elsewhere, we consider recording these severe forms of transgressive behaviors, might be such as of power abuse or scientific and ethical misconduct. So penalties for such misconduct may include publishing the outcomes of the disciplinary procedures so that other members of the community or future employees can be aware of. We do not recommend making non-disclosure agreements, making the parties sign non-disclosure agreements as part of resolving a complaint, because such agreements can prevent victims or survivors from speaking openly about their experiences, and it might hinder the disclosure of important information. So, of course, and this can also contribute to a culture of secrecy, which creates an environment where misconduct can go unnoticed, or it can even go condoned. An important, a good and inspiring practice we have here from the Central European University, which is gives the possibility of collecting complaints under their policy on harassment, where procedures allow organizations recognized as being representative of the community, such as the trade unions, student unions, or work councils, to bring an informal or formal complaint in representation of group of individuals whose allegation relate to the same set of factual circumstances or the same respondent. And this may only be done with the express of prior consent of those individuals being represented. This specific format of such representation should, of course, be elaborated by way of a separate policy, which is developed by the Ombuds Network and Disciplinary Committee in consultation with the Gender Equality Officer or the trade union or student union and other relevant CEU representative bodies. We have some representatives today from the Central European University. Perhaps at the end, if they wish to share more, we can do so. Now, having said that, I'd like to perhaps stop here to take our lunch break a bit earlier in that schedule, but given the rest of the part of the piece that we have after, I feel it's more appropriate to stop here. We will extend our lunch break a bit so you have more time, so we come back at 1 p.m. Central European time, if that's okay with everyone. Therefore, we will only be 20 minutes ahead of schedule. So I'm giving you a longer break for now, for 15 minutes. So lunch break, 1 hour and 15 minutes. We're back at 1 p.m. Central European time. Please do not leave the room unless you have to. Turn off your cameras and microphones. Keep notes of your questions. I know I'm talking a lot throughout this session, but we will promise we will share more later. So enjoy your lunch break, and I'll see you again soon. Perfect. Excellent. So following the similar approach like we did before, I will give a brief definition of the particular P and dive into some specific tips and hints. So provision of services refer to the services that are offered to support victim survivors, families, family members, perpetrators, bystanders of gender-based violence, but also the community members that are affected by it. So provision of services refer to the professionals who provide those services. For example, might be those that are involved in providing psychological counseling or specialized training, but also refers to the existing tools that exist. It might be the guidelines, learning materials, panic buttons, and so on. So all these are there to assist in better addressing the needs of the target groups. And as you will see, once I start describing more the tips and hints, provision of services overlap with the other piece, particularly with protection, prosecution, but also partnerships. So some more specific tips and hints for provision of services. For the effective provision of such services and the immediate support, it is suggested to have a centralized unit within the institution that is responsible for overseeing the services offered. And such unit, of course, can serve as a hub or a dispatching unit. And if the institution has more than one campus, it is suggested to ensure that there is at least one first responder available in all sites. Of course, services should be equipped with capable employees to address all forms of gender-based violence. We need to ensure that there is an easily accessible booking system for appointments with the service staff for either in-person or virtual meetings. When incidents are reported anonymously, as we mentioned before, we need to remember to provide information for all the services available that are either offered internally at the university or by external partners. And the provision of any type of service should be available regardless of the time frame of the incident. For example, in case of a reporting incident that happened months before it was reported, the provision of services should not forbid late reports. Offering psychological support to contact person is equally important. So having in mind whistleblowers, bystanders is another additional target group in addition to victims. So we need to acknowledge the importance of addressing secondary trauma and caring for their mental health as well. Providing first aid guidance on the units and institutional website in case of an incident is happening outside working hours is considered again another good practice to ensure that the provision of such service taking place 24/7. We mentioned that as well in the prevention. And in addition to information for bystander intervention practices, it is suggested to also provide a short guide for friends of victims or survivors on how they can act as supporters. For the particular case, there is a good practice, an inspiring example by the University of the West of Scotland, which provides such guide for friends of victim survivors. And as we mentioned before, the provision of mediation services is controversial, as it can be re-traumatizing for victim survivors to be confronted with their perpetrators. So mediation should never be mandatory, but it can be offered as an option. But in any case, the needs and the expectations of the reporting parties should prevail, and no pressure should be exercised to steer the victims towards mediation. And of course, both parties should be on equal footing. We have more on that under protection. An option also may be to have each party be assisted by a distinct counselor, and then these counselors bilaterally exchange towards immediate solution. However, we want to highlight that this should not be mandatory. The support center that is run by the University of Dundee is considered one inspiring practice, which offers various services, including a chaplaincy center and Lightline. The Chaplaincy Center offers a safe space open to any student and staff member from any religion. It offers a and meeting areas free of charge, while the Nightline is a confidential listening and information service that is run by students to students. So the line is run by, of course, trained volunteer students, and the users can get in touch with them for listening support, but also to learn more about the available services offered. Another inspiring practice for provision of services is at the University of Bologna, which offers services to a wide range of university stakeholders. And this service include online support programs, initial orientation, and basic information also about the on the legal aspects and on the most appropriate ways to contact the competent authorities, and more. And this desk is coordinated by the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Office, which offers an intersectional range of services and support. On their website, you can find more details about the services offered. Partnerships now relate very closely with the provision of services. Partnerships relate to the involvement of relevant actors at all levels. It might be governmental agencies, civil society organizations, might be service providers, trade unions, staff and student associations. And these external partnerships aim to complement the available skills and competences and expertise available within each institution. Now, in the context of research performing organizations, some examples of such partnerships can be partnerships with local or national governmental agencies that include legal and criminal justice organizations, the police, and these partnerships can, of course, among other things, improve how the provision of counseling and legal assistance is offered. I mean, offered internally at the university. Partnerships with civil society organizations, another example, and consider these from the design of policies to the implementation of specific measures. These partnerships can help an organization in organizing joint initiatives, events, awareness raising campaigns, training programs, and so on. Another good practice is partnerships with student groups and associations. So you can engage students from several higher education institutions and research organizations in prevention efforts and create a more supportive environment. So think of what we discussed earlier in prevention and how partnerships can support you organizing such efforts, because there are many, as you see in the next point, local community organizations, civil society organizations with expertise on the topic that can help you enhance your activities. So partnerships with local community and healthcare organizations to coordinate services and provide support to people who experience gender-based violence. It might be shelters, it might be healthcare clinics, and advocacy groups are an important group. Of course, collaboration with the private sector for the provision of more specific expertise. It might be training or the creation of specific tools like a panic button or other resources to prevent gender-based violence. And partnerships with other higher education institutions, of course, and research organizations is very important for mutual learning and to exchange of good practices and resources that are taking place internally. So overall, as you can tell, partnerships are there to strengthen and complement the initiatives and expertise you have available internally. Let's now review some specific tips and hints. When thinking of partnerships, you can think strategically on how you can utilize your external network to also benefit from knowledge that is out there. Participation in European or international projects are considered a good example. It might be something similar to UNICEF or GenderSafe. So you can start by looking within your European projects and funding office at your university to identify perhaps potential groups and partners for collaborations. Leveraging any funding opportunities to support your partnerships, of course, an important item that you can consider, because items such as, I don't know, grants or research funding or corporate scholarship sponsorship can support the maintenance of such partnerships. Informal networks are also encouraged, highlighting the importance of having good relations with key actors and networks with professors and other aware agents inside the organization. So utilize those, but as we said before, it's very important to acknowledge any contributions that is taken from members who are contributing voluntarily. Avoid as much as possible that the work that is done voluntarily or unpaid is taken for granted. So these work should be embedded in the task description of relevant staff, and if volunteers are involved, it is very important to acknowledge their efforts. So external partnerships can also be mobilized to different degrees, either to allow for the provision of services on behalf or included internally at the responsible unit at the university. An inspiring practice that we have here for partnership is Ask for Angela, which is a program that has been implemented in several university campuses and in other public spaces as well. And it helps to prevent, but also it responses to incidents of sexual harassment and gender-based violence. The program provides a discreet way for individuals who are feeling perhaps either unsafe or uncomfortable to ask for the help of a staff member. So for example, if I'm at a bar and my meeting is not and I feel uncomfortable, the staff of the bar is trained and knows that once I use the code word, which is asking for Angela, they know how to react to support me. Might be by either taking me in the kitchen and helping me go away from the back door, or calling the police, depending on what the program includes. So without drawing attention to the victim or without escalating the situation, Ask for Angela is there to provide immediate response and support. This, we've seen that happening in many universities, and including in the bars and restaurants of the campus. So this is considered a good practice where we see how universities collaborating with the private sector. And another good practice is the Why We Did Not Report, which originally came as a student initiative at Charles University in Prague, being both in online and offline posters with anonymous cases. And that was presented at the Faculty of Philosophy as an exhibition, and at the University Culture Center, accompanied by panel discussion, which was inspired by the US Why I Did Not Respond movement. It was a method that it was used by the institutional department and ombudsperson in collaboration with student associations to raise awareness about gender-based violence, but also to direct victim survivors to places where they can receive help. Having said that, we conclude now with policy, which policy brings everything that we've said so far together. Policies cover policy frameworks, which refer to a coherent set of measures with a clear vision and comprehensive strategy that responds to the incidents in a more structured and an integral way. But policies cover also policy documents, which formulate explicitly and specifically the organization's commitment to end gender-based violence. And this can take different forms. It might be protocols, action plans, it might be informative or explanatory documents, it might be strategies, regulations, procedures. We mentioned before the code of conduct, procedures for reporting, everything that we mentioned before. So a holistic policy document addresses all 7 Ps. Setting up such policies to address gender-based violence, of course, requires a great comprehensive understanding of the involving key elements and steps. There are different ways that you can address to start working on a policy, but some practical suggestions that we include in the UNICEF toolkit on how to set up well-functioning policies include the review, for example, of existing legal and background policies. The institutional policies, of course, must align with any regional, national, or European legal framework. So it's very important to start investigating the legal framework at the national and European level. At the European level, there are legal frameworks. We mentioned that, and there's a dedicated page on that on the website of Toolkit. such legal frameworks and policies provide guidance on preventing and responding to gender-based violence. For example, is the Council of Europe's Convention on Prevention and Combating Gender-Based Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, which is commonly known as the Istanbul Convention, that provides a comprehensive legal framework for preventing and responding to gender-based violence, but it also requires member states to take measures to prevent violence and protect victims and prosecute perpetrators. That's a good framework to start with. UNICEF has published the interactive map that we mentioned, which includes also the national reports, but also inventory of institutional policies for inspiration. So you may want to look at this. And another item that is important to be taken into consideration while drafting such policy is the institutional context and internal assessment. So having a good understanding of the institutional context is very important, as it can, of course, affect the implementation of the policies. And this includes, for example, the organizational structure, the governance, the culture, the resources available, the expertise that is available internally. And an internal assessment can help you identify potential challenges on resistance to implementation and determine how to address them. GenderSafe will issue soon such institutional assessment that that research performing organizations can use to assess exactly what was just mentioned. But it's also important to take into consideration stakeholders' engagement and involvement. So to ensure that the policy actually meets the organization's needs, we need to define and co-create measures with stakeholders. This might be students, student unions, staff unions, top middle management, decision-making, because it is very key to grasp the specific context and tailor the policy to your community and needs. This will help you, of course, identify the needs of the different institutional communities, and of course, it ensures an inclusive approach when it comes to designing such policies. Additional practical suggestions for setting up sub-policies can be found in the respective page, but at the end, as an inspiring practice, I will show you a guide that was developed to support organizations who are now drafting such policy framework. I will get back to this later. Very quickly, some tips and hints for policies is that policies in place should, of course, consider addressing all forms of violence. We mentioned that a couple of times today. We need to clearly establish the institutional values, including what is considered as structural behaviors or inappropriate behaviors. We mentioned that before with the code of conduct to define what do we define gender-based violence in the different forms. So develop policies that incorporate these values and consider the current challenges while focusing on proactiveness rather than on reactiveness to gender-based violence. Ensuring institutional policies are known by all members of the organizations. Again, we mentioned that before, but it's very important to implement clear communication strategies to give visibility to the institutional policies. As of course, this will support their effective implementation, but it also creates a culture of zero tolerance. And of course, consider all the pieces for a holistic approach. Having said that, I will briefly present the guide that I mentioned just now. This guide was developed by UNICEF, which provides a clear and detailed plan of actions on how to design, implement, enforce, but also monitor and evaluate such a policy framework. Such framework, of course, should be comprehensive, realistic, and flexible with clear goals, roles, timelines, and this guide provides some advice on how to do that. This document is particularly helpful for those who are at the beginning stages of creating and implementing a policy framework. We believe it provides an excellent starting point with clear and easy to understand instructions and practical tips. This will be sent to you after this training, and you can download it as well from the UNICEF toolkit. Some of the key resources that I mentioned throughout are listed here, but I will send them again in an email with all the necessary links if you want to note this down. And perhaps a closing message from us when it comes to this topic, and then we can open the floor to our discussion. Of course, we truly acknowledge that what you heard today and you're already working on this topic, so you know that better than me, everything might seem a bit quite daunting or overwhelming, but it's important to acknowledge that you should not feel that you have to do everything that was mentioned today. We acknowledge that there isn't any university out there doing everything that we said, but this training and this material aims to be an aspiration, so you know the right direction. So you know where you should be, you know where you should head, and we know that for this topic in Europe, we do have a long way to go, but it's very important to reflect and acknowledge where we stand today and what is possible for you to do next. So I would say I would truly encourage you to look after yourself while you're doing this work, as it might be very challenging and exhausting. But as you can see from today, there are many good and inspiring practices out there. There are many resources that can give you the right direction, and we truly encourage you to utilize this.